You've surely booked something online before. Perhaps it was tickets to a show or accommodation for a holiday. The ability to book things online is super convenient. That's one of the reasons why the Little Lemon restaurant is adding a table booking system to their website. By now, you should know that a HTML form will be an ideal solution for that. Like most restaurants, Little Lemon has different table sizes and different sections in the restaurant where customers can be seated. Therefore, the HTML form must allow customers to decide between the available table sizes, as well as if they want to sit indoors or outdoors. Since both choices have limited options available, it will be best to use radio buttons for the input. Radio buttons are ideal for this form because they allow me to set up groups of options of which only one option in the group can be selected. Now let's explore how to set up a HTML form with radio buttons. I've opened Visual Studio Code and added a new file called booking.html. I've set up the basic HTML structure and added a form element. First, I'll add two field set elements, one for the table size and one for location. The field set element defines a group for the radio buttons. Without the field set elements, all radio buttons will belong to the same group, but for this form, we need two groups. On the first field set element, I set the ID attribute to size. On the second field set element, I set the ID attribute to location. Below the field set elements, I add a button element. On the button element, I set the type attribute to submit. Inside the element, I add the text book table. There are three different table sizes available at Little Lemon: 2-person, 4-person, and 6-person tables. Inside the first field set element, I add three input elements representing the three different table sizes. On the first input element, I set the type attribute to radio and the value attribute to 2. I then set the name attribute to size. It is important to set the name attribute value to match the value of the ID attribute in the field set. This tells the browser which field set the input belongs to. After the element, I add the text 2-person table. On the second input element, I set the type attribute to radio and the value attribute to 4. I then set the name attribute to size. After the element, I add the text 4-person table. Since the 4-person table is the most common booking, I want to have this option selected by default. To do this, I add the checked attribute to this input element. On the third input element, I set the type attribute to radio and the value attribute to 6. I then set the name attribute to size. After the element, I add the text 6-person table. In the second field set element, I add two input elements representing the table location at the restaurant. On the first input element, I set the type attribute to radio and the value attribute to indoors. I then set the name attribute to location, matching the ID of the second field set element. Since the indoor booking is the most common, I'll add the checked attribute to this input element so that it is selected by default. On the second input element, I set the type attribute to radio and the value attribute to outdoors. Again, I set the name attribute to location. I save the file and open it in live preview. Success! The form is set up correctly. Let's test it. If I choose an option for the table size and then choose a different option, my previous choice is deselected. The table location field behaves the same. I can only choose indoors or outdoors. However, I'm testing this form on a laptop with a large screen. On a mobile device with a way smaller screen, it may be difficult for the user to accurately select the small button elements. Luckily, there is a way to improve this by setting the text and button as the input area. I open booking.html again. For each input element and text, I wrap them in a label element, which will group the text with the input element. I save the file again and return to live preview. If I click on the text now, the corresponding input element is selected. Selecting the desired choice will be much easier on a mobile device now. A user will be able to select the button specifically. This form has a much better user experience now. In this video, you've covered how to use radio buttons to create a simple online booking form. Hopefully, Little Lemon will get a lot more table bookings now.